You have another quote in the book that stuck out to me. It said it was the arms race between lying and lie detection that gave rise to our intelligence as a species. Can you explain what that means?
Well, humans are especially social. We lived in large groups, and the main environment that mattered to our ancestors was each other.
Hmm.
They were pretty safe from predators when they stuck together as a group, but they were threatened by and at risk to each other. And in particular, humans had norms, and so they were particularly at risk for being accused of norm violation, of doing something wrong that you weren't supposed to do. And so the idea is our minds evolved to protect us against being accused of norm violations. And that was really important. So, and a big part of most norms is motive. So if I hit you accidentally, that can be okay. If I hit you on purpose, that's not okay. So if I hit you, the first question is, why did you do that? And my mind is going to want to tell you it was an accident. So my mind is working all the time, looking at everything I'm doing, looking for the best story about what I'm doing to protect myself from accusations that I'm doing bad. I'm violating the rules.
Robin Hanson is an associate professor of economics at George Mason University and the co author, along with Kevin Simler, of The Elephant in the Brain: Hidden Motives in Everyday Life. He's a former research associate at the Future of Humanity Institute of Oxford University and is known for his work on idea futures and markets. He was involved in the creation of DARPA's FutureMAP project, and among other accolades, he has proposed the Great Filter hypothesis regarding extraterrestrial life. This book, The Elephant in the Brain, explores the mental blind spots of society and of individuals, with a focus on the ways that we are all unaware of our own motives, thanks to how our brains have evolved to trick us. On today's podcast, we talk about how he applies the lessons of hidden motives to his own social awkwardness and how we can all become more aware of our own blind spots. We look at evolutionary psychology and discuss the so called split brain experiments for context before digging into our baser motives for self deception in politics and in religion. Hansen explains the role of the press secretary in the White House as well as the one in the human brain. Turns out we're a lot more political in our everyday lives than we'd care to admit. The questions are, how can we stay aware of our own hidden motives, and does it serve us to spend any energy trying to do that? What does it say about our evolution as a species that we're able to lie to ourselves so well? And what would the world look like if everyone's motives were laid bare? Perhaps, for example, through cutting edge AI technology. Hansen also happens to be a futurist, so he has cause for his predictions, and you won't want to miss them, regardless of the motives you tell yourself are driving you to tune in. The elephant in the brain book jacket summary is that we are often unaware consciously of our true motivations, but that we come by that lack of awareness somewhat honestly. Your co author is a writer and a software engineer, and I know you're an associate professor of economics. Why did you land on that topic of self deception?
I think I was more forced to it.
Okay.
Uh, I'm an economist, and so I started out my life in physics, and then went into software engineering and AI research for a while, and then I eventually went back to school to be a social scientist to think about institution design, and then along the way to becoming a social scientist, I came across all of these different areas of our lives where our standard theory of why people do things and what they're doing is kind of broken. It doesn't make sense. There's just all these weird puzzles. So economists are usually thinking of people being reasonably rational, means end oriented. We have a standard set of means we think people are trying to achieve. They don't want to starve. They want to be warm. They want a bit of respect,
And they
et
want to
cetera.
procreate.
Right? And then we try to explain most everything they do in those terms. And so the first area I went into detail was I got a postdoc in health policy at UC Berkeley. And a lot of those details just don't make sense from the usual point of view of people trying to, not die. Uh, and I was struggling with
Eat,
how to make sense of that.
procreate, and survive. Eat, procreate, survive. Those are the
But that
motivations.
should catch a lot of things, you'd think, but also a bit of respect, maybe curiosity. Okay, there's some other things, but still, health and medicine just didn't make that much sense. My PhD was in formal political theory, so I also knew a fair bit about puzzles of voting, where we say people, we might say people try to vote in order to make a better policy for their city or nation or whatever. And then
Mhm.
we have all these strange puzzles that don't make that much sense there. But voting is a thing that's pretty small behavior in the sense that it doesn't affect our lives very much. So
It
if
doesn't
we're
cause.
weird about something small, that makes some sense. I mean, you shouldn't expect people to be that, very on target for stuff that hardly matters to them. But for medicine, living or dying, you think people would care a lot about that. And we spend like 18% of GDP on it in the US. And
Mhm.
yet, when that's weird, that gets a little more puzzling. And so I worked out a particular account in my postdoc of what could be going on in medicine, thinking in terms of maybe we evolved a habit of showing that we care with medicine. That is, our distant ancestors, they were sick, they were scared, they were anxious, and maybe other people couldn't do that much, but it would really be really assuring to know that people around you would be taking care of you, and that if they were going to dump you, this would be the perfect time to do it, because you couldn't defend yourself very well, and you wouldn't be very useful for a while anyway, and they'd have to put a lot of work in. But if they don't dump you, then okay, maybe we can understand a lot of medicine in terms of this basic need for reassurance, the desire for you and other people to see that somebody has your back. So
For people who haven't read the book, can I summarize that context for what you're talking about in terms of healthcare and caretaking, by saying that we need to signal to each other that we are worth keeping in the collective of society. And one of the many ways we do that is by showing how we take care of each other, that we're willing to invest our resources in the collective makes it more likely that the collective won't kick us out.
so
Mhm.
first of all, you have to admit that in fact a lot of what we do is to try to show each other things. we
Yes,
we
and I
care about
love
our
this quote.
presentation.
In the book, you say our virtues are most frequently but vices in disguise. Are most
I mean, we're
frequently
not
but vices in
calling them
disguise.
vices exactly, but there are things that people don't feel that proud of, I guess.
Right.
So that's in some sense vices. But
Hmm.
but there's two kinds of things we want to show each other. One is our worthiness and abilities. Another is our loyalty. So
Hmm.
independent of our abilities, we want to show our loyalties.
Hmm.
So the idea is that of medicine as loyalty signaling, it's basically saying, I have these associates and I've been had their back while they were easy to take care of and not much of a burden, maybe even a lot of help. And all of a sudden, they're a burden, and I'm not going to dump them.
Loyalty signaling is distinct from virtue signaling.
From ability signaling. So, I
Okay.
mean, loyalty could be a virtue, but
Right.
right.
It
So,
is
that was
distinct.
the first uh, thing I had where I had this idea of our behavior made sense, but it wasn't what was in our heads about what we were doing. So, when
Mm.
we say we go to the doctor or the hospital and why, we tend to talk in terms of health, in terms of not dying, getting healthy, things like that. And this theory says that that's not really the main reason. We are doing it for this other reason, a hidden motive, a motive that makes sense and isn't particularly evil or vice. I mean, being nice and showing people loyalty sounds like a pretty good thing, really, if you think about it. But it's not the thing we say we're doing. It's a hidden motive, even to ourselves. And once I could accept that as a plausible theory for that set of puzzles in medicine, then it
Mhm.
became more plausible to think about whether that might be happening elsewhere in life. And so then over the coming decades, I collected observations about other areas of life where it might plausibly be true that we also are doing something different than we say there.
Religion, politics, medicine. You don't go into dating, but you do go into body language. Let's talk a little bit about evolutionary psychology. I love that you take the interspecies competition for resources and survival and extend it to what competition looks like in modern life for prestige. Can you explain a little bit about the brain and how you believe our brains evolved to hide our motives from ourselves?
So when we look at other animals, we see them being nice to each other in some ways, and then we might be tempted to say, oh, looks like they're trying to be nice. And then when we have our best explanations of their behavior, sometimes they're actually doing loyalty or ability signaling too. But they're not fooling themselves because they don't actually have a story in their head about why they're doing things. They're just doing them. We humans are different in that we have a story that we tell ourselves and other people all the time about what we're doing and why.
Right. We
So,
constantly want to provide context for our own motives.
right, and that opens the opportunity to be wrong about our motives. Other animals aren't wrong because they aren't saying anything about it.
Hmm.
They're just doing.
So,
Um,
grooming, for example, grooming another monkey.
right, exactly.
They're clear that they're doing that so they'll be groomed back.
Well, they don't need to know why they're doing it.
But they don't need to
They don't
know.
need an
Well,
explanation. They don't have to tell anybody why they're doing it. They
but I
just
love
do
the
it.
comparison between humans and monkeys, and I like to draw it to things that probably my listeners will be interested in. So I think about um, if a boy monkey brings a girl monkey a coconut, it's because he would like to mate. If a nice man brings me a nice martini, he's saying he's interested in my conversation.
Well, he presents himself as that way in words, and you might accept that in words, although you might actually be aware of other motives.
Right.
But then again, you might not. So we humans, we behave, and then we have the story in our heads about what we're doing and why, and what other people are doing and why. And these stories diverge. And the
Mhm.
first question you might ask is why? Why wouldn't it be the most useful thing to just have in your head the actual motive that you have for what you're doing, and to describe to other people the actual motive they have for what they're doing? Why don't we know why why we're doing what we're doing? That's the first puzzle, because the
Question is, do
simple,
we not know or do we not want to admit?
well, at what level do we know, let's say? So the story is going to be that our actions are consistently make sense.
Mhm.
Our actions are doing the things that actually achieve the ends that we have, giving the drink, scratching the back, whatever it is, and accepting the drink, accepting the back scratch. We're functionally doing things that have motives, and then we say words about what we're doing, and then the words diverge from the behavior. And the first question is why? Why would that be true? So that's the puzzle of hidden motives. So our book tries to show you and convince you that you have hidden motives in many areas by showing you the difference between your words and what you do. But then the question that will raise in your mind once you're convinced that you in fact have hidden motives is why? Why don't you know what you're doing and why?
So we evolved to fear the disapproval of the group.
Yes, we want people around us to think well of us and not think badly of us, so much that we evolve this running story in our head, which is your conscious mind, basically, which constantly looks at what you're doing and tells yourself a story about why you're doing it
And
to be
that leads me
ready to
to the
respond to
split brain.
accusations.
That leads me to the split brain experiments, which I thought was fascinating. Because at first blush, I look at the concept of the elephant in the brain and I'm thinking, this book, this book is going to teach me about how angry I should be or not be at people when I know they're lying to me. And we try to judge everybody around us based on intention. We push on our arguments because we want validation that we're right in understanding the person's motives. And we push on our argument because we want them to agree that we see them clearly. For some reason, that's important in modern society. You made a really good argument about how people may not even know their motives. They may have literally evolved to obscure their real motives from themselves for the baser desire of some sort of survival. And that pulls me into split brain experiments. Can you explain what they are?
So this was from the 1960s. For some medical conditions, they thought it might be a good idea to chop the brain in half. Now, one half of your brain connects to one ear and one arm and one leg, and the mouth goes to one particular half of the brain, and the eye, each one has an eye. And so with these split brain patients, they can actually talk to one of them, like saying something in one ear, without the other one hearing. And so they did things like say, stand up and into one ear. And then that one half of the brain would try to accommodate by pushing on that leg and that arm to stand up. And then the other half of the brain would notice, oh, we're trying to stand up, and push on the other leg and the other arm and stand up as well. And then they'd ask the other half of the brain, why did you stand up? And that's the half of the brain that controls the mouth, they would ask. And now, what is this half of the brain supposed to do? It doesn't know why it stood up. And the honest answer would be, I don't know. You were talking to the other half of the brain. But that's not what we do. That's a key thing to notice about people. We try to offer a coherent image to the world of our actions and motives. And so the other half of the brain that doesn't know is just going to make something up. For example, I wanted to get a Coke. That's why I stood up. It could work.
Mm-hmm.
And that's who you are. So this doesn't show you that you have a lot of hidden motives, but it says that if you did, you might not notice, because your mind is designed to just make up stuff as necessary to present a coherent view of its actions.
It demonstrates this intense need we have not to be seen as.
Well, I think it usually just goes together by habit. That is,
Mhm.
I believe this part of the mind just thought it wanted to get a Coke. That would be the simple way to do it. That is, having a distinction between what I'm doing and what I think is extra work. It's extra trouble to manage this distinction between what I think and what I'm presenting myself as. And when people try to manage that distinction, they often get caught up in lies, i.e., it's messy. That is, it's hard to keep track in your head of all the things you would be doing if you were doing what you say you're doing, and have that different from what you're thinking. It's basically hard to lie and hard to be an actor. I mean, for example, most people are bad actors.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes people need to do it, and so they do need to, consciously lie and know that they're lying and know that what they're saying is different than what they think, and then try to keep track of what someone who thought this thing they say they think would think and do on other cases, and try to be consistent with that. But that's a lot of work, and usually we can't manage it. So the simple solution is always just to believe your lies.
Do you think then, on balance, we lie in those simple situations to prevent from taxing our lazy sloth-like brains?
I mean, as an economist, laziness is going to be my first explanation if it works.
It has ramifications for some of the other things I talk about on this podcast, because we talk about relationships, we talk about forgiveness, and because there are a lot of self-help coaches running around beating you over the head with the idea that you don't need somebody's apology to forgive them. But that's hard. So I'm
Well,
trying to
so
understand if people's denial of their motivation is to avoid accountability to their victims, or if their denial of their motivations is genuinely to avoid accountability from themselves.
well, two things. One, I'm less convinced than most people that people being unconscious about an action should forgive them.
Okay.
And the second comment here is, actually, there's this awkward continuum between being unaware and aware of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you see there's a continuum, now it becomes harder to perhaps forgive, because you can't just say, oh, you were completely unaware of this. You were kind of aware of it, you see. And it's a matter of how aware you were. And, it's also a matter of, like, you had things you could have done to be more aware. And often you purposely kind of don't look at the things that you could look at to be more aware. So I might want to hold you responsible for looking sometimes at the indicators that would tell you about your misbehavior or your problematic motives and behaviors. I don't want to just ask in that moment what was in your head. Oh, you weren't aware in your head at that moment. I want to ask before and after. Were you trying as hard as you should have, or at least harder than
Yeah.
zero,
Yeah.
to watch out for these things and to check and prepare, and maybe if you notice a problem soon, fix it as fast as you can. There's a whole continuum here, you see, of how aware we are of things and how much effort we put into to notice.
Which pulls me to politics. You know, self-deception self-deception helps us con other people into believing, because we are more believable when we believe whatever's coming out of our own mouths, right?
Well, a lot depends on basically how hard will other people look. So in the book, we give the example of people on the street drinking out of paper bags.
Right.
Okay, so there's this law that you're not supposed to drink alcohol in the street in many places, and many people want to drink alcohol in the street. And what a common strategy is to put a bottle in a paper bag and drink out of the paper bag around the bottle,
Because you never saw me.
because other people can't prove immediately that it was alcohol. Now, basically, this is people only ever do this for alcohol. So if you see somebody on the street drinking out of a paper bag, you can be pretty sure it's actually alcohol, because
Right.
nobody does that for Coke
It's
or
not
orange
milk.
juice or
It's
anything else,
definitely
right?
not chocolate milk. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not actually really hiding anything,
Yeah.
but it is giving people an excuse to pretend they don't know.
It's giving others the excuse to pretend they
Right,
don't know.
including the police.
Hmm.
Because the police, when they drive by seeing you drink out of the bottle of alcohol, they feel compelled to stop and deal with it because you're blatantly violating the rule. But if they're drinking out of the paper bag, the police feel they have an excuse to pretend they didn't know, and
Right.
they can keep driving by because they don't really want to stop for this. You see, there's a continuum here of how much other people don't want to see. You don't have to hide very hard if other people don't want to see.
Believe you. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
example, with the flirting.
Right.
I mean, people do a lot of flirting, but they tend to do it in a deniable way. So often what people are upset by at a party is that you were obviously flirting. And so all of our friends noticed you were flirting. And I'm embarrassed by the fact that you thought you could publicly flirt while I was there around our friends. You're insulting me
Yeah.
and disrespecting me via your obvious flirting.
What we're getting towards is the idea that we're sort of rationalizing our behaviors to ourselves all the time, all day long. And that really it's just to survive in a world where survival is not about being stoned to death, but survival is about being shunned by society or not being able to
Right. Well, of
perceive
course,
ourselves the way we
in past
want.
societies, you might well be stoned to
Right,
death
right.
for
But in these
other
in this
people's
particular
perceptions.
society, yeah, it's not gonna happen in this particular society. So
But you might be divorced, or you might lose your job, or you might
yeah,
be canceled by the larger world and end your career.
counseling
These are
is one
consequences available
for
now.
sure. But how can we identify rationalization? How does it connect to cognitive dissonance, for example? My favorite definition of cognitive dissonance is that cognitive dissonance is the mental stress that is caused by when who you are and what you need to exist as whole is in conflict with the life you are living. So if you think about society and norms and how we need to be perceived as good people and as acting on good motivations and intentions, it makes sense that we would need to believe our intentions are good.
Or more directly, um, we need to sell other people on the idea that our intentions are good. And
Love
it's a
it.
lot of work to have in our own head the thought we're not and still try to pretend as if we think we are. So it's just easier to think we're good. And often that's what we do. We just go with the easy route. Uh,
Yeah.
there's this key question here. You asked, how can we tell when we're being honest, when we are truthful about these things? And you have to ask the first question, do you want to know? So evolution in, gave you this capacity and these habits to not know certain things.
Mm.
So if you think your goals are aligned with evolution's goals in designing you, and that you're in the sort of situation where it had in mind this habit, then you want to do what it wanted you to do. You were built with these delusions, and they were there for a reason. And so the main reason you might want to consciously know is if somehow you're in a different situation than your evolutionary past set you up for.
Mm-hmm. How
So
much
you might
do you
say,
want to
I
know?
just care more about the truth than evolution did. I want to know the truth. Look, I'm a manager or salesperson, and in my role in the world, I just need to be better at reading people and understanding other people, including myself. So I'm going to pay the cost, whatever it is, to know things better. Or you could even say, look, I'm in this really difficult relationship situation where it's really important for me right now to figure out the truth about this particular relationship. And I'd say, I'm willing to pay a bunch of costs to figure out the truth here. And finally, you might be someone like me who is just not very socially skilled. So most people, they just do all these things naturally, and they just glide through the world intuitively doing the right things without needing to think about it. And for them, there's less point in thinking about it. But when your natural inclinations are not so smooth, they aren't really that appropriate, they don't work so well, but you're smart, one of your possibilities is to think about it and maybe consciously analyze what's going on, and maybe then be a little less rough and crude and hurtful by your accidental blundering through the world.
Tell me about an area where you're not smooth.
Socially, I'm just socially not smooth. I mean,
So
I'm
how do
better
you
now.
apply?
I'm almost 65 years old now, so I've had some time to think about things and practice and learn. But as a young person, I just was very nerdy and socially unaware,
Mhm.
and so my basic instincts, what people often say, hey, on a date, just be yourself. And
Yeah.
they don't mean be yourself, they mean this better
No, they
self they
don't.
hope you can be.
Yeah, my normal self is in pajamas. My normal self doesn't have 6 layers of spackled makeup on. That's not what
Right,
we do.
exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But anyway, so I was just not very socially skilled in dating or in relationships or, with family or reading people's agendas for at work or, colleagues or mentors or things like that. I just didn't have much an ability to read between the lines, figure out what people really meant,
Mhm.
accommodate their real motivations when they didn't say what they were. I
So
just
how
was
does the
oblivious.
concept of hidden motivation help you be more smooth in your everyday life?
So for example, we talked about medicine. Uh, our standard story about medicine is that it's about living or dying, and it's terribly important. And then the hidden motive story about medicine, well, medicine isn't actually that important for living or dying. It doesn't actually help your health very much, but it's important for showing people that you care and letting them show about you. So now when people say, if I'm sick or something, I get less stressed about going to the doctor because it's not going to do that much anyway. But I'm more okay with other people pressuring me to go. I see that as their, loving me and caring, wanting to show they care about me, and then I want to let them do that, and then fine, I'll go if they push me because that's the way to let them see that I accept and I'm grateful for their caring about me,
So
right?
hidden motives helps you understand the reciprocal nature of those signals and accept when people are trying to show you something about how they care.
Right, and plausibly not force the issue into the open and not insist they be honest about it, but let them have their pretense and then do the thing they're doing as long as it's a reasonable thing to do, which usually it is.
What part of the brain is the press secretary? And why does it prioritize rationalizing even when presented with facts that conflict with what we're saying?
So the key idea, as we discussed before, was you have a whole mind that's unconscious, and it basically does everything. So what's the point of this conscious mind mostly? The
To stress
conscious
us out?
mind, it's
Yeah.
mainly there to present the story to yourself and others of what you've been doing and why, so that you can defend yourself against accusations that you're violating norms. You need to be able to have a story, and that's why your conscious mind is your press secretary. Its job, like the press secretary of the, say, US president, is not to know the truth about what's going on. Its job is to present a compelling story about what's going on so that people will give the president a bit of slack or even
And its job
admiration.
is to present that to yourself as well as to the world.
Right. So the press secretary is better off not knowing all the inside details of what's going on so that they can honestly, sincerely say what they think is the best accounting for what the president's doing.
We assume that the reason why the press secretary says everything emphatically is because they don't actually know the whole story. We believe they've got plausible deniability for the purpose of legal ramifications. But your book makes me assume that people need plausible deniability even from themselves.
I mean, if you reflect on it, it's really pretty damning fact that the president has a press secretary. I mean, they don't actually do these press conferences that often, and the president certainly has time to go out there and just to answer the questions directly.
Good point.
So, and they are professional politicians. They are professional, speakers and public presenters. So it's not like they're just too awkward to be standing out there on the podium answering questions.
Yeah, you're not
But
awkward.
we, but we
You,
allow them to
yeah.
have press secretaries. So that's pretty damning, really. And so for individuals, we don't have so much of a problem. When I tell you stuff as my conscious mind, you don't have access to ask my unconscious. So this is kind of the only thing I could plausibly offer you. So you kind of have to accept that. But you do have to wonder if you should be looking at my actions and comparing them to my words.
Yeah.
And often we don't. we
Yeah, we look at their words. There's a section in the book that you dedicate to body language. My favorite quote from that was, on the topic of body language, signals need to be expensive so they're hard to fake.
So a lot of what we do is related to status. We discuss status a lot in the book. And there's two kinds of status, prestige and dominance. And eye contact is a key element of that. When somebody is acting dominant and you look them straight in the eyes, that's typically interpreted as defiance. You are not accepting their dominance, and you are challenging their dominance by looking them straight in the eyes. You should, look downward, look away, because otherwise you'll be seen as challenging, and then they will have to treat you as a challenger, i.e., squash you, to show everyone that they won't accept challengers.
That's what the king has to do. Yep.
Right? But for prestige, it's okay to look at them. It's even expected to look at them. They even want to be looked at because the idea is that for a prestigious person, you like them and respect them, and you want to copy them, and you want to be like them, and you want to learn from them. So, of course, you would look at them in order to learn from them.
I have always been baffled by people's discomfort with eye contact because I make eye contact and I'm not sure you're listening if we're not making eye contact.
So, in some sense, body language and eye contact is more honest because they are costly signals, as you said. And that's a problem when people get too good at reading it, because then we can't help but send honest signals when we're supposed to not be sending honest signals. You may well want to limit that channel exactly because it's too honest. So, for example, people with their eyes often show hostility and displeasure and disapproval. So say there's a meeting and there's the boss saying something, and there's a person around the table who basically doesn't respect this thing the boss is saying. They think this is stupid. And they can compose their body and make sure they don't say words, but maybe they can't control their eyes. Their eyes are showing that
Eyes are
they
going to
think
go.
exactly. And so that's a problem. The more that we're all looking at the eyes, and the more that this person reveals things with their eyes, the harder it might be. So they might just look away for fear that their eyes, if the boss will see their eyes, they would see their honest reaction in their eyes.
Right.
Here's an interesting futurist question, which is, what if, as we have cameras more around the room, et cetera, and microphones, et cetera, we have algorithms behind these cameras and microphones that start looking more at the hidden motive messages.
Oh.
What if they are able to start reading better your tone of voice, your facial expression, their body language, to extract from that the common messages about what people are saying with their tone of voice, body language, and facial expressions and eye direction, eye gaze? Right. What if these algorithms are able to read this and show us all what they're reading. I called this the hypocalypse in a blog post a while ago. It's the apocalypse of hypocrisy
I
because
love it.
all of a sudden, all of our hypocrisy becomes visible in a direct way. And now, say the boss sees your hostility in the meeting, but as long as nobody else sees it or doesn't have to admit they see it, like with the brown paper bag, he can just ignore it and go on because you're a pretty good employee. Yeah, you're sometimes hostile to my things, but I'm going to keep you on the margin because you're good enough. But if everybody sees that you're defying my authority now because the cameras have told you that I might have this hostile eyes, now I might not be allowed to ignore you anymore. It's like what if the police had a machine to see through the brown paper bags and see that it was alcohol, then they would have to pull you over, right?
So, in a way, society benefits from our ability to hide our motives from ourselves.
We're adapted to that world.
But I mean, it functions, right? We
Right,
keep
right. So
things.
we're in an equilibrium where
Yeah.
we can't see some things, and we're in the habit of knowing that people can't see some things usually, and therefore behaving in a way that expects them not to see things.
Because
So,
the application that I go to for the Apocalypse AI technology is sales. Let's say you keep bringing people in to watch your technology pitch, and they have to do it in the same conference room. If 98 times out of 100, when people say, "Sure, send me the proposal," but they go
they don't
like
mean it.
this as they get up, it means they're trying to distance themselves. Maybe you're not catching the body language, but maybe the AI would catch that if they say that and then they push back, you're not getting the deal.
Right. But what if they knew?
That's a good application, right?
Right. Well, but see, once they know that this camera is going to read leaning back as sending that message,
Yeah.
now they will know it's publicly saying no by leaning back, and they can't lean
Well, we
back
can't tell
anymore.
them about the camera. We can't tell them about the
No,
camera. We have to use the
but
camera.
everybody would know. That is,
I'm talking about a secret AI
yeah,
camera.
yeah. Okay, so the world where some people have the secret advantage over other people in reading things, that's a different world than where everybody knows that it exists. And the first world doesn't last very long. It leads to the second
Yeah.
world pretty fast, right? I think we should be preparing for this future. See, if everybody manages their impressions and we take away these signals, then we can no longer trust people in person more than we do in Zoom if they can hide it in person too.
Yeah.
And so we may not be able to trust each other as much because we can't get all of these signals that we otherwise could get that were trustworthy.
And one of the biggest signals of trustworthiness to the collective in modern society is religion. You discuss religion in the context of motives. You make it clear that religion forces self denial of many of our biological baser impulses towards animalistic behavior. If the purpose of religion in organizing societies supports us to signal our willingness to accept and adhere to these norms, does it follow that most people don't actually believe?
Well, there's the question of what actually believe means. Uh, Again, I mean, people say some things and then it often differs from some actions, but not others. So sometimes there are actions close to our words, like going to church or
Mhm.
dressing up or, coming to a funeral. And then there are actions far away from our words or far away from particular words where there's more of a deviation. So, for example, soldiers, when they are far from battle, tend to act brave. They talk about how confident they are that we're going to win and how confident they are that they're going to go stick it to them and how eager they are to fight and, et cetera, and how loyal they are, et cetera. Far from battle, they have high confidence.
Uh-huh.
And then spatially in time, the closer you get to an actual battle, the more their mood changes, the more their confidence changes, the more their claims weaken, until in an actual battle, they could be pretty realistic about their assessment of the risks and their bravery and their loyalty to the various sides. Because, you know, right there in the battle, if they say one thing and do another, it'll be pretty obvious. And they don't want to be that obviously different.
Hmm.
And so, you know, there's a continuum of consistency there, right? So, um, So some people, they might be consistent with their religion in terms of they go to church and maybe like the easy, if there's food restrictions, they follow the food restrictions, for example, and they do very simple, they associate more with people who share the religion. But then, for example, if, people say Muslims, you get, maybe you'll get 70 virgins if you die in battle and it'll be a wonderful afterlife. Don't you want to go die in battle? And they're not so eager to die in battle.
Christians will go to heaven and Hindus will have a
Right.
better life the next time around, or
Right.
moksha.
But this is true of politics too, and many other things, where again, we say some things and do others, but the closer a connection we can get between the actions and the words, the more consistency we will see. So
sure.
when somebody says A right now and then a minute later says not A, people listening to the conversation will go, oh, didn't you just say A minute ago and now you're saying not A? The closer they are in time, the easier it is to notice the contradiction. But if you ask them a month later, they may well contradict themselves and not even remember, and nobody will care, because fewer people are noticing the connection between what they say right now and a month ago. One of the early observations of political science was that if you ask ordinary people for an opinion on politics and you ask them the same question a few months later, you'll just get completely different answers typically. People just can't manage to maintain consistency over long time periods on their political opinions. But if you ask them a minute later the same thing, they'll give you a consistent answer.
So we are sloth-like, we are lazy, we are inconsistent, and we are all just trying to make it through.
Well, we're executing evolved adaptations, right, but we're attentive to how easy it would be for other people to check and how much they care. Sometimes people don't care to find our inconsistencies because they can't be bothered. They don't want to have to do the thing that would imply, so they don't even look very hard. And other times they're very eager to find our inconsistencies. So, and so the things that we're all the most deceived about are the things that we all agree the most on, because none of the rest of us are going to point out our inconsistency. So, for example, with medicine, most everybody wants to say that they think medicine is really valuable and it really helps your health and that it's really important to give it to everybody. Since everybody agrees on that, almost nobody checks it.
Since everybody agrees on it, almost nobody checks it. Yeah, okay. Well, and the larger question is, do motives matter because we care that deeply about why people do the things they do, or do motives matter because we care about enforcing behavior?
You might not care what people think as long as you pay attention to what they do.
And but hence politics and religion.
But many intellectuals, like you and I are being in this conversation, we act like we care about what we say.
Yeah.
And we act like it matters what we say. And so with respect to those contexts, we might worry about what we say.
Well, and you and I have the luxury of not being in a struggle for survival, so we can care about what we say. We can sit with these questions. Not everybody does, and probably people who would be in a battle for survival don't have the time to listen to this podcast.
So we are in a battle of survival, though. That is, we don't much risk dying in the next few years personally. But if we care about our long-term influence, then we are in a battle for survival, because some of us will have more legacy influence than others.
Well said.
It's interesting to notice that they are people who their environmental context cues them into their struggle for survival, such that they consciously attend to that struggle in their thoughts and connected actions, and we do not so much. That's, in some sense, the fundamental puzzle of our era. The question of our era is, how is it that we don't seem to care about our legacies?
It's a very elevated way of looking at it.
You can't look inside yourself and see your motivations. That's not going to work. In part because you're complicated, but also in part because this part in your head that doesn't want you to know, it's stronger than you are. It's going to win.
It's stronger than you are, for sure.
It's going to win this battle. Okay. So the highest level summary of the book is that you're just wrong a lot about your motivations. But the first question is, do you want to know? And maybe you don't want to know. And maybe you should just keep living your life not knowing. If you want to know, then we've got a book that will help explain it to you, so you can see in substantial detail how you're wrong about your motivations. Look for the average motivations from other people's behaviors. And now you can say, how different am I really from the average person? And honestly, on most things, you're not that different. You're not special.
You're
Okay.
not that special.